welcome to the next edition of the Holland Land Office Museum's Artifact Video Series. My name is Ryan Duffy. I'm the director of the museum, and this week we are going to talk about one of Genesee County's most prominent citizens from its history, General Ely Parker. Now, Ely Parker, or Hasanowanda, as he was known in the native tongue, which meant leading name, was born on the Tonawanda Reservation in either 1826 or 1828 in the modern-day area of Indian Falls. His parents were both prominent members of the tribe, and as such he was in line to become a leader of the tribe as he grew older. Now, his parents believed strongly in educating young Ely, and he actually went to school at a Baptist missionary church near the reservation. Now you might be asking, where did he get the name Ely from, if that's not what his birth name was? Well, he was actually given the name after he was helped by a doctor named Ely Stone when he was a young child and sick. Ely nursed him back to health and was also one of his teachers. For a time, Ely actually moved to Grand Rapids, Ontario, where he lived for a time with other family members. However, he was teased a lot and didn't seem to fit in real well, so he came back home. And it was soon after that that he actually met one of his longtime friends, a man by the name of Lewis Morgan, who was a researcher out of Rochester, and it was Morgan that actually put Parker through school at Cayuga University, but he only went for 1 year as troubles at home actually brought him back quickly. But he and Morgan stayed friends and actually worked closely together to tell the story of the Iroquois and Seneca people to a white audience with mixed effect. They created maps and stories that brought the Seneca culture in particular to the wider American society. Now, the trouble at home starts about 1847 as a lot of Seneca land starts to be sold off and bought off, and Parker returns home in order to prevent that as best as he can, with some success, and saves quite a bit of the Tonawanda Reservation in the process. However, because of this, he can't return to school, so he decides to switch careers altogether, as his first education was actually studying law down in Ellicottville. And he even passed the bar in New York State, but since he was Native American and technically not a United States citizen, he was not allowed to practice. By about 1850, he actually makes his switch to engineering and gets a degree in that field from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, located in Troy. And this opens up many doors for him and actually gets him on his trajectory that he follows for quite some time. By 1850, he's actually hired by New York State to work on the Erie Canal on one of the projects to widen the canal and to improve upon it. And this leads him to be hired by the federal government to work on similar projects out in Galena, Illinois, where he meets another one of his longtime friends. That would be Ulysses S. Grant. At the same time, he's actually elected as a Grand Sachem, or sachem, basically put him at the forefront of negotiations between the Iroquois, New York State, and the federal government as they try to preserve as much land of their own land as they could. When the Civil War breaks out, Parker joins up and is made a captain in the engineers of the 7th Division of 8th Corps, where he ends up meeting Grant again as he actually makes his way to Vicksburg as Grant is in command there in 1862. By a couple years later, Parker is actually made an adjutant of General Grant and then made his military secretary and is responsible for writing all his correspondence. So most of the writings of Grant from the last couple of years of the Civil War are actually in Parker's handwriting. As we get to the end of the war, Parker's put right in the spotlight of one of the most monumental events This is the surrendering of Robert E. Lee at Appomattox Courthouse. Parker is in the room when Lee surrenders, and he is actually the one who writes the document that Lee signs surrendering the Army of Northern Virginia. So Parker, you could say, literally wrote the words that ended the Civil War. This is his time in the public spotlight is not over though, as once Grant becomes president in 1868, he tabs Parker as his head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He was the only Native American to ever be put in that position. And for throughout his two-year term, he institutes a well-constructed peace policy that actually smooths over a lot of relations between Native American tribes, particularly out west, and United States interests. However, once he leaves, everything goes back to chaos and warfare that we sort of think of when we think of the American West. Once he leaves that federal position, he actually travels to New York City and takes up a position with the New York City Police Department. Now, there's an interesting story of him while at the police department. It's not 100% verifiable that it actually happened, but I'll share it with you because it's interesting either way. One day, Parker is sitting in one of the precincts when in walks two rather famous men from American history. The first was the commissioner of the New York City Police Department, Theodore Roosevelt, and the second was a well-known photographer at the time. This was Jacob Riis. Now, Jacob Riis had an interest in the tenements and slums of New York City and wanted to photograph them. And these are actually the photographs that make him particularly famous, and I'm sure you maybe have seen some of them at some point. So in this case, Roosevelt himself was actually going to take Riis around to some of those areas and invited Parker along. However, Parker's life ends rather tragically. He actually develops Bright disease, which deteriorates him quickly, and he actually dies basically penniless and is buried in Fairfield, Connecticut after his death on August 30th, 1895. However, that is not his final resting place, as his body is actually transferred to Forest Lawn Cemetery in Buffalo, where he is buried next to his ancestor, Red Jacket. So if you go to the Forest Lawn Cemetery in Buffalo and you go in the main entrance, there's the Red Jacket Monument, which you can't miss, but there's a stone right next to it for Ely Parker. Now we have several of his artifacts on display here, so I'll take a little moment to show you those. As you can see here, we have a couple of photographs and prints showing off Parker. The one on the left is a rather famous print of the surrendering at Appomattox, and you can see Parker's there behind Grant. He's the second from the right. It is said that Lee made a remark that when upon seeing Parker, he said, well, at least there's one true American here today. Here is the man himself, Parker dressed in his military uniform. We also have Parker's chair and stool and his traveling trunk. Parker's name is actually carried on today, as if you go out west to Arizona, you can actually go to the Ely Parker Dam. I have a picture of it here, and this was given to us by one of our board members, Mr. Don Burkle, so we thank him for that. But you can see that his legacy still carries on today in different parts of the country, but right here in our own backyard. So I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Artifact video series. As always, if you happen to miss any of the previous ones, you can go back and check it out on our website or our YouTube channel that this will be on at Holland Land Office Museum. And I hope that you stick around for our future ones, and if you get the chance, come on down and see us, and you can see all these wonderful artifacts for yourself and learn even a little bit more.